Hi guys, welcome back to another Podfic. Today we are going to be continuing United Alliance Institute. Today we are reading Chapter 6, A Happy Birthday is Spent with Friends. Summary, Izuku turns 14. I do want to remind everyone that this fic does depict graphic depictions of violence, and there is some minor character death, as well as being a little bit psychological with villain Izuku. Izuku bounced on his heels as his mom lit the candles, the smoke billowing off of them softly. The gentle light hit her face and amplified the tired lines under her eyes, and the way her smile wasn't quite as big as it usually was. She had been looking more and more tired, the time she saw him growing greatly in between. But that would all change now. He was finally 14, and he could take over some of the other responsibilities, in between his usual classes. They could spend more time together, and he could help her out more. "Zuku," she asked, and he blinked, looking away from her face and back to the cake in front of her, the fluffy layers and big drip of icing running down the side. He could see the chunks of strawberry in the bottom layer, the pieces of chocolate in the second, and the vanilla pieces in the third and smallest one. "Do you want to make a wish?" she asked softly, and he grinned, nodding slightly. He didn't really need a wish, or want it, too old to believe it did anything. Plus, he had all he could want. They did not celebrate birthdays, except those that were extremely special, like today's. He would be going to the field in 2 years, which meant that his training would change. He could finally be able to fight against the quirked ones on an even field. Even Kachan and the half-and-half user. His mom was here, and he had strawberries, something they hadn't been able to get for a while. But it made his mom smile, so Izuku shut his eyes, acting like he was making a wish, before slowly blowing out the candles. He managed to get all of the candles in one breath, looking at his mom, who clapped her hands and smiled. Her own classes for him had grown, more etiquette than anything. He never understood what good it would do him on the field, but it allowed them more time. He gently took his fork up as she gave him a piece of the strawberry cake, laughing slightly. The cake melted in his mouth, and he shut his eyes, practically drowning in the perfect taste and sweetness of the cake. He worked hard to keep himself with a healthy diet of meat, vegetables, and rice, but nothing could compare to just how sweet cake was. He hadn't had any since he had turned 8, and he grinned, cutting into another piece. He had a session with Kayama planned for after this, and then he would actually be able to go into the labs with his father and talk about the serums and growth changes with the doctor. His mom hummed, and she looked up at her as she smiled slightly. She reached forward with a napkin, wiping the side of his face as he flushed, grinning. "Is it good, Izuku?" she asked, cutting her own slice of vanilla from the top. He nodded quickly, taking another bite, savoring the flavor as it exploded on his tongue. "I'm glad you like it, my little analyst. Did you make a good wish?" He hummed, not wanting to lie to her, but he also didn't want her to feel he was too old for her. So he just nodded silently, pretending like the food in his mouth was keeping him from speaking. Getting older meant so much to him, and he knew he could do more, could be more for his father, who wasn't there. They had waited for an hour after waiting up for him, but he still hadn't shown up when his mom had finally brought the cake out with the candles. He was coming, he was just busy. Izuku reached forward, cutting a slice of chocolate and placing it on the plate beside him, licking his fingers as the cake touched slightly. "Who's that for, Izuku?" his mom asked, a lilt to her voice that he loved hearing. "Father," he said simply, making sure it looked perfect on the plate. "He enjoys the chocolate flavor." He heard his mom's fork hit the ceramic plate louder than usual, and he turned to look at her pained expression, his hands shaking as he pulled them back to his lap. "He's not coming, is he?" Izuku asked quietly, reaching for his mom's hand where it lay on the table. She pulled it back quickly, holding it to her chest as she looked at the slice of chocolate cake he had set to the side. His heart ached that he had made his mom sad, and he stood up, moving around the table to stand beside her. "He left this morning," she said softly, as he wrapped his arms around her shoulders, humming. "He didn't say anything, he just left." Her voice was hard to place, and Izuku just pushed into her more, shutting his eyes. He shouldn't have said anything. Shouldn't have made his mom more upset with everything else she had on her plate. She didn't need to worry about him now that he was old enough to do stuff. He would just have to wait to see the doctor. "He's busy," Izuku offered, trying to provide some comfort to his mom. She huffed, resting her face in her hands as her shoulders tensed up under Izuku's touch. He backed up a bit, rubbing at her shoulders as she mumbled something into her hands. He wasn't going to push her, wasn't going to go beyond what she was comfortable with. "I'm busy, Izuku," she said, her voice gaining an edge. He stopped rubbing, just setting his hands on her shoulders as she touched them gently. "We're all busy, but I'm here for this family. If he keeps taking these trips longer and longer, I don't know what will come of this institute." She stood up, and he backed away, allowing her space as her voice rose an octave. "Does he seriously expect me to run this whole place by myself while he runs off doing God knows what over in America?" Izuku grabbed her hand, rubbing at her wrist as she tried to push into her shoulder. He hadn't meant to say the wrong thing, to get her worked up. "I can help you now, Mom," he said gently, pushing his thumbs out down the length of her palm. It tightened into a fist as she pulled her hand away, looking down at Izuku with something he had never seen in her eyes before. It wasn't just the exhaustion she always had. It was anger, disappointment, and it was directed at him. He took a step back, squaring his shoulders as he grinned up at her, trying to tell her it would be all right. They would be all right because they had each other and they had all their roles. That was how it worked. Her face melted, and she sighed, taking his shoulders gently and kneeling down to pull him into a hug. He tightened at the sudden closeness, his hand twitching at the knife on his hip before he relaxed into her. She smelt of sweet cake and smoke, of graphite and dirt. It was a scent he had missed for years, until now. "You're just a child, Izuku," she said softly into his ear as her hands twisted into his hair. He hated being called that. But he didn't say anything, too scared to mess it up again as he always did. He just leaned into her gentle embrace as she hummed softly. He didn't want to let her go as she finally stood up, her knees cracking loudly. "Mom?" he asked, still not sure what else he could say to make her smile again. She laughed quietly, but her smile wasn't quite right, didn't crinkle her eyes or show the small dimple on her left cheek. "I'm just a bit tired, Izuku." She patted his head, and his heart sunk before he even heard the next words. "How about we go over the graduates' costumes and your new class later?" No, he didn't want his mom to leave just because he had said something stupid. But he just nodded, biting his lip as she smiled a little more. It was good for her. She needed a break. He would be fine. He repeated it over and over again in his head as his mom motioned to one of the guards who led her from the room, the metal door slamming loudly behind her as his head started to hurt. His gaze shifted to the cake still on the table, his half-eaten slice, his mom's with one bite taken out, and his father's untouched. He hadn't meant to ruin it. And now the cake would go to waste, and he couldn't even spend his birthday with the one he cared about. The one birthday he got before he was 16 and shipped out to a faraway war. The last one he got where he knew what his place was and how he could help. But he had just messed it up. He didn't even notice the first tear until it hit the floor, the sound echoing in his ears as he stepped back, his eyes widening. No, he didn't cry. That was a show of weakness, for cowards or people who would die. He tightened his fists, wiping at his eyes before he grabbed the plate of chocolate cake, his hands shaking. This was all his fault for getting this stupid piece of cake and for wanting to have this day. He screamed, slamming it against the floor as his head screamed louder than he ever could. It all went quiet as he watched one of the guards from the edge of the room shift, hand reaching for something. Izuku was moving before he could think about it, racing forward as he unhooked and flicked the safety off his pistol. As the man produced a gun of his own, Izuku had already gotten close and fired. "Bang!" he whispered, watching in fascination through clouded eyes as the man's gun clattered loudly to the floor, the safety not even off. Every guard his mother personally saw hired and delivered was trained to not flinch, no matter the sound. Someone had made it in. His gaze flickered to the cake, his hand holding the gun steady as he debated his options. His mom had personally made the cake. She always liked to try a bit of the batter before it went in. If it was poisoned, she would already be dead. He should have never let his guard down just because it was his birthday. He flicked the safety back on, rubbing at his face again as he froze, pulling his hand away. They came back red, and he turned to the man, his eyes narrowing as he grinned wider. He had ruined Izuku's clothes and face with his disgusting attempt on his life. He put the gun back in its holster, walking the few extra steps forward to kneel beside the man's crumpled body. He reached for the badge, ripping it from the guard's uniform and turning it over in his hands. The make was beautiful, though stained with blood, the black and green swirls echoing through it. A cleaner's badge. Izuku held it up to the light, but nothing happened. The work was not put into it like his mom did to get the projector numbers. Still, he tucked it into his own side pocket. He touched the man's face gently, using the barrel of the gun to move his head to the side, taking in the pale skin and sunken cheekbones. Izuku forced an eye open, his eyes narrowing at the yellow of the whites, his teeth matching as Izuku raised his lip with his gun. The man was sick, diseased, and he had somehow made it inside, wasting his chance to shoot while distracted. He picked up the man's gun, flipping it around as he examined the weight and basic engravings. He dropped the magazine out, seeing no bullets before he pulled open the chamber. A single bullet was loaded in, as if that was all it would take to kill him. They were getting sloppy in their attempts. Izuku stood up and backed away before the blood could completely ruin his clothes. Take him to the doctor. See if he can find a country of origin and affiliations. Izuku ordered the cleaner standing nearby, tossing the gun back onto him as they moved quickly. Izuku took one by the shoulder, and they froze under his touch, waiting for an order. Give me your clothes. These are simply unhygienic now. He motioned to the nice white outfit his mom had given him for his birthday, now stained red with blood. The cleaner nodded, taking off his overshirt. Just the shirt, Izuku said before they could fully strip down. His black pants had not gotten any of the splatter, and he didn't need to switch those out. He took a napkin from the table, wiping at his face, and he sat as he sighed and stretched, before taking off his shirt. He didn't want to risk getting any blood in the special genes of the quirked ones, and possibly messing with any genetic mutations. Blood transfers were a dangerous act with quirks being involved, some causing extreme reactions, like allergies. The other cleaners took the body out as the first finished undressing, handing his clothes over to Izuku as they switched. It was surprising how well the clothes fit him, the small young adult shrugging on his tank top. Go find new ones, Izuku said, dismissing him as he dropped the napkin in the trash, turning to the cake and the smashed plate with crumbs of cake all around. He felt better, more sure of where he was standing and who was around him. He took a deep breath, kneeling and cleaning up the trash, careful to not cut his hands. He made the mess. He needed to clean it up, needed to get his mind off everything. He finished scooping up the crumbs, wiping his hands off as he stood up. He almost wiped his hands on the clean black pants, but decided against it, grabbing a napkin instead. Keeping the white long sleeve white was something he wanted to do. His mom had stressed the importance of keeping his outfits clean, even in fighting, in order to stay in control. He needed that control. He adjusted the black vest, taking a deep breath. Get me boxes, 30 small ones as well as plastic forks, he said to a guard, the cleaner still gone, dealing with the body. The guard nodded, heading away as Izuku started on cutting the cake. He worked slowly, making sure each cut was even all the way around, pieces separated from the whole. When the boxes arrived, he put a slice in each box, separating them by flavor. He started at the vanilla, working his way down to the best one on the bottom. Each box got a fork, threaded under the edges of the container, set aside as well. He groaned, popping his back as he wiped off the knife, setting it on the now empty plate in front of him. He glanced around the room, biting his lip as he tried to decide what to do. The blood stain would take too long to clean up, and he had plans for the day. So he grabbed the 5 largest slices, vanilla, and set them to the side as he adjusted the other piles. Get me a wagon, he finally said, an idea forming as he chuckled, and a large blanket, 4 of them. The cleaner who had entered the room to clean the wall bowed, leaving again with the cleaner and the towels. Izuku paused before he left, humming slightly. Get me my case from the doctor, he finally said, stepping out of the dining room. The closest ones to him were the new shipment, yet to be tested and separated accordingly. It had only been a month since they came in, but with his father now out of town, they would be delayed. Izuku couldn't help there. He shook his head, putting his grin back on his face as he headed out and towards the other, smaller buildings. He would love to show off how far he had made the level 5's quirk stretch, making them formidable foes on the field. But they came with heightened security and guards that Izuku didn't want to deal with. He probably could make it in and out without someone alerting his father for not filing out the correct paperwork. So he walked to the furthest building, isolated, with a large yard around it where the level 4s resided. The quirks were less destructive, but still particularly strong, each room divided in 4 people to allow bonds that would hopefully last through the wars. Divided by sex, there were quite a few rooms, all ranging in ages and years in order. He stopped by one of the middle ones, pushing the night key into the lock and shoving his shoulder into it. It popped open loudly, and he pulled the key back, grinning at his plan. He hadn't stopped by this particular room in some time, skipping their last weekly appointments to focus on the lower and higher levels. He still made sure to keep their training regimen up to date, using information his father had given him and his own knowledge of the powerful quirks. He still recalled all 4 faces, the quirks powerful and interesting. 4465 was the dark-skinned one, hair shaved to avoid tangling, the multitude of scars stretching back over the scalp. He clapped his hands, happy to see that they had no problem identifying him or where he was in the room, even past the scars that stretched over their eyes. He had been training them on becoming resilient to their own acid for years, and now they could manage having it on their skin for 5 hours before passing out from pain. It was truly amazing. Beside them was one of the quirks he had thought most belonged to a level 5, though the sheer undestructiveness and drawbacks kept them here. 9775, with their ability to produce inanimate atoms from the lipids in their own body, was truly beautiful. They had one of the most extensive meal plans of any of the trainees, but they balanced it with becoming incredibly strong, giving them a larger build. He had managed to produce a rifle, fully functional, last time he had used the quirk, and was working on solvents and healing applications. The other 2 in the room were younger, more forgetful to Izuku, their quirks still in early stages of training. He would focus on them later. Instead, he turned on his heel to stare directly at the 2 he cared about now. They stood, moving to the center of the room, their hands intertwined. Could 9775 produce a resistant enough serum to 4465 to avoid it burning through their skin? If he could replicate that serum, it might speed up 4465's own training process. He shook his head, grounding himself as he chuckled, walking around the pair. They shifted back into a defensive stance, though they kept their hands down. It was good to see Yamada's training with the level 4s as sergeant was going well, though they weren't used against him. He laughed as he threw his arms around their necks, leaning in beside their faces. He had to stay on his toes to speak to them directly, but he didn't mind much. "I have something for you, too," he said, releasing their necks and snaking his hands down to grab their wrists. He pulled their hands apart, pulling them forward as he hummed. He paused as he neared the door, remembering something he had forgotten. He let go of their hands, pulling the keys from his neck and unlocking the door, stepping out. He kept his foot in it to prevent locking it again, knowing they wouldn't dare try to step out. One of the guards handed him his case, and he grinned, taking it quickly and pulling it back into the room with him as the door clicked closed. "Hold," he ordered, setting the case in 9775's hands, not worried about the light weight. He unlocked it with another key, humming as he pulled it open to reveal 2 rows of syringes he had prepared for any events. He pulled out 2 of them, holding them in one hand, as he locked the case and set it on the floor under his feet. He gestured for 4465's arm, taking it roughly, as he uncapped one syringe, the other between 2 fingers. He pressed his thumb above the vein at their heavily scarred wrists and hands before gently inserting the needle. "This serum," he explained, excited to do so, "is made to block your body's access to the quirk factor. By injecting it through the bloodstream, it searches out those cells that specifically support the factor and kills them." He pressed the needle into the vein, slowly pushing down on the plunger while he talked. "It has proved very efficient in the trials, as the component of it itself is blood from a quirked one. However, by modifying and separating part of the gene, it's usable for all blood types." He pulled the syringe out, pressing his finger to the injection spot before dropping the arm. He capped the now empty syringe, putting it in the suit of the vest as he prepared the next one. "Unfortunately, we still haven't managed to separate a heteromorphic factor from the user, but time will tell." He clicked his tongue to the roof of his mouth, completing the same procedure to the second one. "Though, it is a shame to remove these powers. I assure you, it is only temporary. A safety measure, if you will." He turned to the door, picking up his case and attaching it to his arm with a small cuff on it, taking and pulling 9775's hand forward. They hesitated slightly, and he paused, turning to look at them over his shoulder. "Speak freely," he ordered, searching for what they wanted to say as he grinned. "Where are we going?" 4465 asked, their voice hoarse from when he had accidentally burned their throat. Izuku giggled, clapping his hands together, the case hitting his other arm as he twirled on his heels. He rocked back, opening the door behind them as he did so. "To my birthday party, of course." Eijiro was dead. At least, he could assume he was, and he had gotten really, really damn tired of feeling after so many years here. He hardly even remembered much about his routine before arriving here, the days all just blending together. It was an odd feeling to know he didn't have to think about what he was doing, because it didn't matter. His life was planned and scheduled, and nothing he did would change the routine of anyone around him. But this was the first unplanned thing that he had been to since he was dragged here the first day. Ochako, Koji, and Kyoka looked just as confused and weirded out as he felt, rubbing at the same spot that he felt a need to. The injection had left something feeling off in him, his breathing not quite working right. It was just an odd emptiness he didn't like. If this was how normal people felt, he was actually kind of sorry for them. Death wasn't even in the room, and Eijiro didn't know what he was supposed to do. It was obvious that the thing in front of them was food, closed food, but there were forks attached to each of them, situated in front of the 30 or so of them. Many he had never seen before. Some he had fought in group training sessions, but others were a complete mystery. Namely the group who were all sat on one of the odd blankets, shoulder to shoulder with each other. There were 8 of them in total, each looking at the others as if they were speaking without words. Heteromorphic quirks. They were more commonly called level 1s, but Eijiro had heard talk of them on the streets, though he had never actually seen any. Those were the unlucky few taken from birth, raised in this hellhole. They all seemed to look towards one, though she seemed oblivious, looking down at the box that she cupped gently in her hands. Her hair was braided around large horns, deer ears peeking out on the side of her head. He could see her weirdly bent and shaped legs sprawled under her, her position constantly adjusting. And judging by the look she was getting, she knew something she wasn't saying. Before he could point this out to Ochako, the door slammed open, and Midoriya bounced into the training ring, his sickening grin sprawled across his face. He would never get used to that look, of pure excitement, malice. It made his hair stand on end, and every bruise and scar he had gotten from training ache. The horror stories he had been told as a child simply did not do the fear justice. He plopped down beside the deer girl, giggling slightly as the other mutant types shifted away from him and her, but she didn't move, looking up into his eyes. Eijiro waited for the moment of contact, for him to do anything. Matching his gaze always seemed to upset him when he didn't want you to. But instead, he laughed, taking a box from the center of the room and opening it up, his hands twirling the fork around like he did his knife. The knife that was currently sitting in front of him, like he had not a care in the world. Anyone could grab it. "Thank you all for coming," he said loudly, and Eijiro had a fight to not flinch backwards at the suddenness. His eyes, and from what he could tell, everyone's eyes, were not locked on him but the knife. If the thing actually took away his quirk, he couldn't use it to defend himself from a blade attack. They were all defenseless. When no one responded, though, Death seemed to shift, looking over each one of them as Eijiro forced himself to look in his eyes. His smile never dropped. "Speak freely so long as we are here," he said, more an order than an actual invitation to speak. He pushed his shoulders back, the box still cradled gently in his hands. The deer girl beside him made the first move, opening her box slowly, the sound of the cardboard scraping echoing in the quiet room. She finished opening it, and Eijiro watched as her eyebrows twisted in confusion, shifting the box to the side gently. "Izuku?" she asked, and Death looked up at her, a grin on his face as he tipped his head to the side. Izuku, his first name. This hybrid was close to Death, close enough to use his real name. That's why the others eyed her so warily. "What is it?" Her voice was soft, calm. Death looked over her shoulder, humming as his own eyebrows knitted in confusion. "It's strawberry cake, silly." He opened his own box, holding it for her to see. Eijiro could see glimpses of pink and red through the top of the box. "It's my favorite." He picked up his fork, pressing it into the box and pulling out something crumbly and soft-looking. He took a bite, grinning widely. Eijiro flipped open his box quickly, his hands shaking as he stared at the chocolate cake in front of him. He hadn't had any since before his mom's had to leave him with Konai's group. It was always the special treat, once a year for his own birthday. He had forgotten all about birthdays by just counting the number of days they had been there. He looked up, watching everyone else stare at the cake in their boxes, some with small tears running down their cheeks. He looked at the dear girl who slowly picked up her fork and got a piece, staring at it. Only one might be poisoned, or they all might. Maybe it was another test, another experiment for him. The girl took a bite and her eyes went wide, hands shaking slightly as she looked back down at the cake in her hands, chewing slowly. "Do you like it, Pony?" Death asked, pushing towards her with a wide grin on his face. She nodded quickly, licking her lips as she looked back down at the food. He heard the scraping of plastic against cardboard and looked over to see some girl with big hands and orange hair digging into her own cake. Eijiro did the same, looking to Ochako, who picked up a piece of hers as they both took a bite. It was sweet, so sweet that Eijiro almost wanted to spit it out. But he couldn't bring himself to, as the chocolate melted on his tongue and he had to shut his eyes to fully enjoy the explosion of taste. Of time before this. Before he had gotten his curse, before the police had found them, before his moms had told him that he'd be safer without them, before Konayo's safe house had been raided and all of them collected. It was simply delicious, and he finished it before he could even register it, opening his eyes. They stung slightly, and he had to look away, wiping his eyes before anyone could see. But they all had similar expressions, many already on their next bites, each with a small smile over their face. "Eijiro, why?" Ochako whispered beside him, not heard over all the other sounds. He shrugged, too enraptured by the cake to actually think about it. He should be worried about it, but everyone else was simply in their own moment, not paying any attention to him or Death. Except the pony girl. She was smiling at Death in particular, her ears twitching slightly as